what I've personally observed, whether it's operators or investors, et cetera. One is, I think, people who have lived through a recession before or many recessions before. And two is the ones that haven't, very simply put. I think the ones that have lived through a recession before, generally speaking, they're much more responsive or agile in doing proactive planning around different scenarios of what could happen. Because at the end of the day, no one has a crystal ball. And so it's much more about anticipating the different, call it decision trees of what could happen down the road, rather than really controlling for the future, which no one can really do at the end of the day. And I think the second camp of folks that may have not necessarily gone through a recession before is really a mixed bag, depending on who they've surrounded themselves with, whether it be their boards, other leaders, their peers, etc. But what I would say is, compared to the last recession, what you do see as a common pattern of companies that come out, not only survive, but also thrive through a recession, is the ones that have done proactive planning. Because proactive planning allows you to be more confident in making sometimes decisions that might seem uncomfortable or bold. It gives your business and your colleagues and peers and your teams a lot more comfort and certainty in their day-to-day jobs, because they don't need to worry about, being laid off or not being encouraged to take on some of those, smaller experiments that actually could make a big impact. And then I would say, lastly, like the whole, which is in every business, but particularly important, I think, in times of uncertainty, is just around the communication flow, which goes back to not only financial reporting, but just like the frequency of how people share valuable insights within teams and within a business. That is like super, super critical. So having a solid cadence inside a business where you have discipline around, let's say, looking at your biweekly or monthly revenue forecast, looking at, the various metrics across the pipeline and making sure marketing's version of SQLs versus sales version of SQL is consistent, and how the data is ingested is inconsistent and extracted is consistent is super, super valuable. And having that discipline around the cadence and communication is definitely something that makes a difference between the companies that survive versus thrive.
I think it's always very easy to do scenario plans around numbers, right? Like, hey, what is the top line impact, or how's that going to impact my bottom line or my cash flow? But how do we weigh in, let's say, the cultural or human impact of, let's say, reducing headcount or continuing to invest in growth when that would potentially, cut short our runway?
I think one of the top things, if not the first things, that I would look at, and I think a lot of larger companies definitely tend to do this, is just how strong and how strong and how let me rephrase, what is our foundation and our strength relative to our peers and our competitors? Because if you're a business that has a huge balance sheet with lots of money and funding, and you have supportive investors, whether they be public or private investors, then you can afford to take bolder, bigger decisions. And also, your employees and your teams are just a lot more confident in their ability to do the same. It also forces a business to really double down and look at their product and service offering. Like, what is it that we're doing ultimately that our customers really, really value as something that we're 10x better than someone else? Because when you go through a recession, ultimately, the finance and the business has to start rationalizing on things that are nice to have versus needs to have. And your customers are going to do the same.